Estrogen was the focus, with experts, including today's guest, Dr. James Simon, questioning whether today's warning labels match up to the science. And testosterone also made its way into the discussion. So, what does this mean for women making decisions about hormone therapy? And why are some options still out of reach in the US? In this episode, Dr. Simon breaks it all down, what really happened in the FDA hearing, and what it means for your health. Dr. Simon, it is so great to have you here. We are talking about something so important, which is a debrief on the FDA hearing about menopause.
Glad to be here, Georgie. Really enjoy our last conversation. Looking forward to this.
For those who don't know, the FDA had a hearing on menopause, and several of you had presented at this hearing, sharing your various perspectives. And I'd really love to talk to you more about how you feel about the outcomes of that hearing, or what do you see as the most important outcomes of that hearing, and what still feels unresolved for you?
So I think that there are a couple of things that we should mention. I don't know that there are any outcomes of the hearing yet.
That's fair.
There was the hearing.
Yes.
That was a good thing in general. Showed me, someone who has been in this field for a very long time, that the FDA was at least considering a new approach or new possibilities in terms of how women's hormonal health is handled at the agency, and specifically in the concept of how we label women's hormonal products. Whether or not it'll end up with any changes, that remains to be determined, but it's a good start, at least getting it out there and getting some experts on the subject to voice their opinions is always good.
Yes, no, absolutely. And I guess to backtrack for those who didn't listen or watch, so I watched it. It was a 2-hour session and my eyes were glued to the screen and I took lots of notes. And what was really interesting is the focus was primarily on estrogen. There was one presenter who spoke about testosterone, and we didn't dive into progesterone at all. But I understand why, because estrogen is such an important topic, as is testosterone. Well, all of the hormones, but there's a specific reason why estrogen was the main event, so to speak. So why don't you, for those who didn't listen to the hearing, can you tell us about why it was so important to talk about estrogen specifically?
So all estrogens, whether they're used for vaginal dryness, pain with sexual intercourse, treating recurrent urinary tract infections, or for the treatment of hot flashes and night sweats, or even the preservation of bone density and prevention of osteoporosis, all the hormones, regardless of type, route of administration, dose, etc., they all have some of the same elements in their labels. And the elements that are in their labels are warnings and precautions and are extremely scary. They are based upon adverse events in situations of the highest risk using systemic hormones that may or may not apply to women at lower risk or to women at all. And so having very serious, scary risks itemized on every hormone therapy, particularly those that are very low dose or have never been documented to have any of those risks, is an important discussion to have. And I believe that was the primary focus of that meeting, even though the panelists, of which I was one, chose to speak about a number of other topics. That was the primary focus of our remarks.
So diving into the role of the FDA then, I think if we were to simplify this, because not everyone may fully understand this estrogen piece to the next level, which is from the perspective of a woman, they're often prescribed a patch, a pill that can also be inserted vaginally, and also the cream and probably other formulations as well. And they all,
Many other, many
yes.
other.
And I want to just say before, because I don't want this to be like 15 minutes into the episode and people not hear it. They serve different purposes, and that is important. And that is why the labeling was being discussed, correct?
Yes, I think that it's broader than that, but it's certainly correct. The FDA has a process called class labeling, meaning any product that has any element in the class gets labeled a certain way. Speaking directly to your question, it doesn't matter if you're in the class and used for vaginal dryness at extremely low doses, or you're in the class and you're a patch used for hot flashes or night sweats, or you're a pill in the class used to prevent osteoporosis, or any combination thereof. It doesn't matter whether you're a pill, a ring, patch, a gel, a lotion, a suppository. They're all plagued with, my words, the same class label. And while that may be an appropriate position, comparing a patch, a gel, an oral pill, or a systemic vaginal ring, that may be totally inappropriate for a very low vaginal only treatment, which was part of my own testimony.
Yes. And I'm going to pull up actually some of the notes that I took of what you had shared. So, what I appreciated, you started by saying that the FDA is balancing creating a label, and they have to balance the risks and benefits. And they also have to make it simple and clear. And by creating that balance, perhaps we've leaned on an oversimplification when it comes to estrogen, because really what you're saying is all estrogens are labeled the same when they shouldn't be.
And further, they're all labeled the same, regardless of what the science has documented to date.
Right.
The FDA, further to that same point, has a long tradition of erring toward the side of safety, overemphasizing risks in some cases, rather than emphasizing efficacy or benefit. And I purposefully commented that I appreciated that that's a difficult balancing act, one which we've known about and understood for a long period of time. But in terms of certain hormones, my comment was I think they got it wrong.
Yep. Yes. And so since you brought this up about for certain hormones, they got it wrong. Let's flip real quick to testosterone. So we only had one presenter there, Dr. Kelly Casperson, and she's all over social media, always talking about testosterone. And I did find it interesting, like that we had only one presenter on that, but I still think it fit at least within the point trying to be made with respect to the FDA needs to understand menopause hormone therapy better than it does and label as such, approve as such, et cetera, et cetera. But you and I have discussed we need those kinds of discussions for progesterone as well. So it is a shame that progesterone also didn't get a person, but there we go. So can you just educate us about testosterone and how it was handled there, if you wanted to cover that specifically, or just what we need to know about testosterone and the concerns about where the FDA is with that?
So Dr. Casperson, and to a lesser degree, Dr. Rubin, mentioned that there was an absence of a testosterone product that's FDA approved for women, which is absolutely clear and true. And the forum did not provide an adequate time or commitment to talk much more about that. So this was more of a waving the flag. Here's the next thing we need to talk about, FDA. But it's an actual problem because, as your listeners should know, all women make lots of testosterone. They make it their entire reproductive lives, and they continue to make it after menopause, albeit at lower doses, reaching about unmeasurable levels by age 60. But testosterone is a very important hormone in women, often completely neglected for all the purposes for which Dr. Casperson mentioned, and most of them are beneficial. Sexual desire being the best investigated. And there's actually a worldwide consensus saying that testosterone should be used in menopausal women for its beneficial effect on sexual desire, also referred to as libido, or if you're English, libido.
I had no idea they pronounced it that way there.
They do.
Well, speaking of English, so the UK has approved testosterone for women. That's a huge move. And I know with my background in the biopharmaceutical industry, you tend to go straight to the UK first, then come to the US. That's usually the path of approvals. So hopefully that means some good news coming up for the United States. Fingers crossed.
Let's hope.
But let's hope. But just for those who don't know, there have been so many companies who have tried to go to the FDA. And one of the things I hear, and this applies to many women's health products, is a lot of these companies feel that there's extra studies that they're having to do or more proof that they need to share for women, anything related to women specifically. And in a lot of respects, I understand that because we are childbearing humans, but I think some feel like maybe it's getting a little bit overdone. But I do want people to understand how much people are trying. Like many have tried for testosterone. And the challenge, so people understand what happens behind the scenes, is if investors are concerned that the FDA won't approve it, then the investors will not invest to run the clinical trials to prove it. And so it's this crazy circle of what will the FDA do? Let's predict it. Should we invest? And if there isn't investment, there isn't forward momentum. And it's this constant cycle for everything. And it seems to be, from what I hear anecdotally, especially challenging when it comes to women's health products.
So let me put some numbers and experience to that comment, which
Please.
completely correct. It's assumed that men want and need testosterone. Emphasis on the word need. If their testosterone is low, below the bottom end of the normal range, they're thought to be testosterone deficient. And if you and I wanted to bring a new testosterone product to market for men who are testosterone deficient, historically, we would need about $20 to $25 million to do a study, a randomized, placebo-controlled trial documenting that our product, let's call it new testosterone, was able to raise testosterone levels from their low starting point to, but not above, the normal range. And we would have to do that over the course of about 6 months. But just remember, $25 million. That's
Just a drop in a bucket.
take-home message there. But let's assume that we wanted to bring new testosterone to the market for women. We would need about $900 million. And we would need to do a similar study, but in fact, document safety over the course of 5 years. And that turns out to be a bridge too far and a cost too high for most companies to tolerate. And as a result, there are no testosterone products available for women.
Yes. And I've been hearing all the things that people have to do, such as I think there's one formulation where they put it in the freezer and they take a knife and like cut slices off of it. Then there are the pellets where I've heard stories of someone getting overdosed on a pellet. And so the husband had to lock himself in the closet because he couldn't take it anymore with the demands of his wife because the testosterone was so overdosed.
I had one patient come to me to, quote, dry her out of her testosterone, unquote, because her husband had sent her to stay in the basement until the woman he married got back to the bedroom.
So does this happen often? Because, there's so I know we want to talk about the FDA, but I do want to just address this because people are going to ask is, how concerning is it that people are going to these other means? And if anything, since they have to, because some really do need this testosterone, many do, what is probably the safer, non-approved route?
So I think it can be a variety of approaches, but to very carefully make sure that the amount of testosterone that the women are getting is consistent with what normal reproductive aged women have or less. There's no reason to give testosterone to women who already have normal levels. And if we are going to give women levels of testosterone that are in the low normal range for men in an effort to kickstart their muscles or their sex drive or their X, Y, or Z, we are likely to have quite a few women who have beards and bald heads and large clitorises and may have other problems which are not normal. They may not have a normal voice. They may have a very raspy voice that cannot be fixed or not be fixed easily. If those women used to be professional singers and now they can't sing in the range that they were professional at, they may lose their career. So we need to be careful about what doses for what people for what duration, and we don't have a lot of good safety data on testosterone outside of a single product or two, and only given to women at normal physiologic levels. And so levels above that or products different from that, it's buyer beware. You're on your own. We don't know.
Okay.
No data, no safety data particularly.
Going back to estrogen, before we move on more to the FDA pieces, just because people did ask, because I posted on social media, even quoting some of the great things you said at the FDA hearing. And there were some really interesting questions. So I just wanted to address this more specific to vaginal estrogen. And you reminded me of this when you spoke about the ring. And so the ring, you had said, is systemically absorbed, right? Then
There are two FDA approved vaginal rings for menopause.
okay.
They are very different.
Okay.
One of them is for local treatment of women who have dryness, pain with sex, and it's just for their vagina.
Okay.
And that ring is called a est ring, ESTRING.
Okay.
The other ring is for systemic absorption of estrogen, same as a patch or a gel or a pill, but where the estradiol in that ring is delivered through the vagina
Got it.
into the systemic circulation. They're often confused. I've had them confused by pharmacists.
Ooh.
I've had one patient who should have gotten the local ring, who was a breast cancer survivor, get the systemic ring. Fortunately, she complained of severe breast tenderness, not anything permanent, and I investigated her ring. And even though the rings are exactly the same size, they look very different.
Okay.
And so they need to be distinguished and used properly.
Okay. Holy cow. Thank you. I'm glad I asked that question. So now when we go to the cream and the vaginal pill, can you talk about those? And if you could also address one side question. So I'm trying to remember now on social media if people were talking, I don't think they were talking about the ring. They were all talking about the cream and the pill. And some have said that once they were on that, they felt better, like even their hot flashes went away. And I know in the hearing you had said that it's not systemically absorbed. So can you just talk about the differences between the cream and the pill for the vagina? And then also why some people are saying they may feel their hot flashes have gone away.
So, a couple things. First, the vaginal cream, particularly when first started, if given in accordance with the label instructions, may be different based on different products. For example, Premarin vaginal cream is dosed in a very small amount, whereas estradiol vaginal cream may be dosed in a very large amount. And given a large amount, it may have systemic absorption, particularly when it's first started. That could easily explain both breast tenderness and reduction in hot flashes. When either of them are given at low doses, or when the estrogen pill for vaginal dryness and pain is given at a low dose, it's not absorbed to any degree that's measurable, particularly after the initial doses. So those products are typically dosed every day for 2 weeks, during which time there is a small amount of systemic absorption for 2 reasons. One, when the vagina is very thin and subject to all the symptoms, it's more absorbing of estrogen. And second, those products are given every day.
Got it.
After the first 2 weeks, sometimes referred to as the loading dose period, then the doses are reduced to twice weekly. And because the vagina is now thicker in response to the estrogen, which is why the symptoms are better, the estrogen doesn't go through the vagina nearly as well. Plus, the dose is lowered from every day to twice a week, and it's impossible to measure the estrogen in the blood of that patient.
Got it. So I have to ask, if I have the BRCA gene or I just had breast cancer, how do I take this information? Do I say, heck no, I'm not touching this? What would you say to that patient?
So I would say to that patient, why is she using or contemplating using these products? I'll explain. Many women for decades, if not generations, went through their post-reproductive years without using any vaginal estrogens.
Fair point.
These days, women who are after menopause are generally healthier than their mothers, their grandmothers, their great-grandmothers, and their great-grandmothers' mothers. They also are likely to have a partner who is healthier than his or her mother, grandmother, grandmother's mothers, etc. And as a result, this younger couple, but menopausal, healthier couple, albeit menopausal, a male partner who may have Viagra, Levitra, Cialis, Stendra, etc., this couple may be sexually active, and this modern woman, may need to have treatment of her vagina with low-dose estrogen. She may also be healthy enough to not be in a nursing home or on a deathbed where we care about her having recurrent urinary tract infections. And for all of those reasons, there may be good reason, including desire on that woman's part, to have a healthy, more youthful vagina and to use these products. Let's now shift it to your actual question. She's either had recent breast cancer or has the BRCA gene or has risk factors for breast cancer. And my answer is, for that individual woman, we look at the reasons that she wants to be on these products. But her risk of breast cancer or her recent breast cancer are seldom reason enough not to use these products, because they are not shown to increase her risk either of breast cancer or a breast cancer recurrence. The little bit of absorption we spoke about over 2 weeks doesn't make a difference
Okay.
in her life.
Okay. That's fair. Thank you. Very, very helpful. Okay. So we've covered the hormones. Is there anything about what happened behind the scenes or conversations that have happened since that aren't necessarily in the public eye, or maybe on social media and you have reactions? I'm thinking of, for example, there were some clinicians who said I was asked to present and I refused to. There is obviously, and you had addressed this too, it's like, well, what will the FDA actually do with this? I'm just so curious on what your perspective is.
So my personal perspective is that if a invited lecturer, speaker, expert is going to speak before the FDA, Congress, or whatever, they should have the right to participate or not participate. Some may choose not to participate, and that's their individual right, and they should not be thought of negatively if they choose not to participate. My point of view was that I personally feel that my years of experience, knowledge, research expertise, etc., is something that brings value to the FDA and to this discussion. And so, given the opportunity that I had to voice my opinion, I did it. For better or for worse is yet to be determined. All of us that did speak, I think, were quite uniform in our hope that the FDA would make some changes. Those changes have not been made yet. I haven't heard that they're being made. I don't know what has become of the expert panel, but we remain hopeful.
Okay, good. So I will say it was clear that you all coordinated because you had, for those who don't know, 5 minutes per person, one slide each. Some got creative with the slides. And I felt you all did a great job in telling the whole story. Like each of you picked a piece of the puzzle that made sure that the FDA had the full picture.
So one of the things that Commissioner McCary asked the panel, which I answered and others answered, he asked the panel what important information was missing from the scientific community that was required immediately for the FDA to make changes. And I said very emphatically that there were no additional studies that were needed.
Okay.
And I'm sticking with that. I think we can always get more studies. We can always do previous studies better. Scientific information always evolves, but we've got enough time, effort, money, experience, research, etc., to make the kinds of changes that the panel suggested and or recommended to the FDA to get the process started. And I said that because the changes that went into the labels, the class labeling, occurred in the time frame of the early 2000s, 2003, 2004 time frame, and the damage that's being done by those labels happens every day. And so I would err on the side of more aggressive and or liberal changes to the local estrogen package insert in an effort to avoid harming those women every day while it's determined by an expert group whether there's any more important and or bigger longer term studies that are really required.
Okay, no, that makes sense. And to clarify, when you said there's no more studies needed, you're speaking specifically about estrogen.
I'm speaking specifically about low dose vaginal
Okay.
estrogens for what's now referred to as GSM, genitourinary syndrome of menopause. Basically, it means urinary symptoms of the bladder or vagina or both with menopause, dryness down there, and pain with sex or discomfort with sex, and various permutations of those symptoms, for which all of those products are approved to one degree or another, but they all of the estradiol and estrogen containing products say that they cause heart attacks, strokes, dementia, breast cancer, and endometrial cancer, for which there's no credible data whatsoever.
Right. And I will say I'm a huge fan of vaginal estrogen. And also, for those who may ask, being on the patch does not have an impact on your vagina, correct?
Not entirely correct. I
Oh,
always want to
you-
agree with my host or hostess, but not entirely correct.
okay.
So here's the story.
Tell me.
If a woman is on adequate systemic hormone therapy, like
Okay.
patches, to quell her hot flashes, night sweats, etc., and prevent bone loss, there's still something like 25% of women who need to use something vaginal in addition. But it means that about 75% of women do not.
Interesting. Okay. Okay. Well, I personally experimented. For those who may want to know my stories, I didn't think I had any challenges. But then I was training for the marathon and I ended up getting a pessary because I was having stress incontinence. And then I ended up getting on the vaginal estrogen. I tried the pill first, didn't really do much. So I used the cream and I no longer need a pessary. And yeah, I kind of put the pieces together. I was like, oh, okay. That's why. So there you go. Worked for me.
Let me explain it because I think your audience would benefit from the explanation.
Please.
So the urethra, the P tube in a woman is very short. It's why she's more likely to have urinary incontinence and also more likely to get urinary tract infections. But think of it as just a hollow tube that goes from the bladder out into the opening of the vagina so she can pass her urine. After menopause and in the absence of adequate estrogen, that tube has very thin, rigid walls. And when one coughs, sneezes, does jumping jacks or whatever, it's very difficult for her muscles to close that short, rigid, thin-walled structure. And so under the right conditions, the pressure of coughing, sneezing, jumping jacks, etc., forces urine right out the urethra, and we have incontinence. Now, with a pessary, you can put a little kink, if you will, in that tube so that when you push down, the kink gets bigger and you don't pee through it. Or in your case, I suspect that the vaginal estrogen cream that you used caused the tube to become more pliable, for the walls to become thicker, and therefore the small open diameter that was left more easy to close because the wall is more distensible because it's softer and the inside lining of it is thicker, and so it's easier to close. The diameter is smaller, so easier to close, and so you naturally were more continent.
Got it. Well, thank you. I had no idea. Thank you so much. So then I will say this. You and I have discussed this before, which is how we women put our health last. And here we're giving examples. And because I share all these things on social media, et cetera, and I'm open about all these women's health topics, no matter how personal they may be, I have many friends where we go on long walks and I hear more often than not, sex feels like razor blades. And then they wait, and they wait. And then their mental health issues are getting worse because now they're in perimenopause and the hormones are drastically changing, and we suffer and we wait and we wait and we wait. You see this as a clinician. Tell us why we shouldn't wait, and what is most heartbreaking for you to see in your clinic?
So I think what's most heartbreaking for me to see in the clinic is that woman that's having dryness or pain with sex and is waiting, and who now has serious pain with sex and is waiting, and who's now saying no to her intimate partner nearly all the time and waiting, and then gets divorce papers, or finds out that her husband is having an affair when much of that could have been avoided. Having pain with sex shouldn't be the cause of the end of a relationship. It's seldom the only cause, but it certainly is one of the causes. And I like the expression healthy wife, healthy life. And I would encourage women to get evaluated and treated so that they can be the healthy wife for themselves, most importantly, for their intimate partners, their children, and other relations, because hormones not only help sex, and we've been focused on sex and pain with sex, but hormones can improve sleep, well-being, and mood, etc., etc. And these are critical to one's productivity at work, one's productivity at home, one's sex life, and relationships, not only their intimate relationships. I do agree that women tend to put themselves last, but here there's an investment in themselves that I believe is relatively small compared to the potential benefit that benefits the whole family unit and extended family, including their work family. And so I'm very encouraging of women to take care of this part of themselves. It's not going to take care of itself.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And by the way, when we're talking about hormones, there's testosterone, progesterone, estrogen. So there's lots of hormones that are involved in these conversations with clinicians. Menopause has become quite a big business. I know on social media, I mean, there's so many things, supplements being pushed. Some are feeling that there's pressure to be on hormone therapy, and maybe not everyone needs to be on hormone therapy. Clear with how you've answered all of these questions and all the discussions you and I have had. You come at it from a very practical. I notice every time we talk, you take a step back. It's like, hold on, let's talk about the whole picture. It's really important to do that. So if you were to now take a step back and talk about the whole picture, how, as an individual navigating this space, whether it's someone trying to do right by women and building a business, trying to get funding for something, trying to sell the supplements, a woman saying, I don't know what to do. Everyone's telling me to be on hormones. How do we take a step back? What do we really need to think about?
So I think women should do their best to educate themselves. I'm not at all clear that social media is the place to do that. There are websites that are well established by reputable organizations that are not social media hawks or trying to sell something. They're trying to educate. And I would include the International Society for the Study of Women's Sexual Health. I would include the Sexual Medicine Society of North America. I would include the International Society for Sexual Medicine. Those are my three go-to sex med spaces.
Okay.
Then you have the International Menopause Society. You have the Menopause Society, which is the former North American Menopause Society. If English is not your first language, there are comparable societies in countries where your first language is spoken. So if you're a French Canadian, there's Canadian sites with French translations of all of their English or all of their documents. French, my colleagues in London think we don't speak English, so there's English there. It's a little different. They spell estrogen with an O, just so
Yes.
you know.
Yes.
So there's lots of information out there. Those are the places I would start, not with social media. And then once one is feeling like they have some grasp on the information, meet with your family doctor, internist, gynecologist, someone, and make a plan to meet with them more than once. It's a complicated subject. You're not going to get enough time from that practitioner to get all your questions answered, but go in with a list.
Yes.
Prioritize your list. Don't expect to get through 1 through 20. Hope to get through 1, 2, and 3.
Yep.
And not when you're going for your annual visit. If you want to get a pap smear and a pelvic exam and have a question about your vagina, okay, that's one type of visit. If you want to talk about menopause, hormones, yes or no, other treatments, yes or no, do I need this? Do I need that? You need a separate visit. If it's about sex, you may need more than one visit. You may need to bring your intimate partner. He or she might want to be there with you. It's complicated, but it's not infinitely complicated.
Yes. Agreed. And one thing I will say is I have a PCPIC every year as well as my OBGYN. And I find that even between the two, we cover different things, but we make it holistic. And one thing I will say is social media is there. People use it. It's just the culture, right? Often what I'll do is if I see something on social media, I will go to the society's websites or advocacy groups' websites and I will use that to cross-reference. So for those who are just like, nope, I'm going to social. Okay, fine. But if you hear something different, probably go to maybe the Menopause Society's website as an example.
Yeah, I think those are good things to do. I would mention something else. I think that artificial intelligence, if you ask the right questions, can give you some pretty good answers.
Yes.
I wouldn't accept any answers from artificial intelligence unless they could give you references,
Yes.
which you could then double check in
Yes.
the way that you're checking back with the source itself. I find it to be reasonably helpful with really dramatic but rare exceptions. Someone, for example, brought me a paper that purported to say X when I had written very clearly that it was not X, it was the opposite of X. And I was trying to understand where all this information came from when all of my research and experience had said just the opposite.
Oh,
And
goodness.
so I asked the person who had printed out all this stuff, what was the reference? And I'm looking down, and sure enough, there's my name as one of the references having said X, Y, and Z. And I know that I had never published that, but I'd published the opposite of X, the opposite of Y, and the opposite of Z. So I said to her, if you don't mind, let me print you a copy of that reference and you can take it home and read it for yourself. And she called back and said, I was very sorry to have wasted our time together because clearly this was wrong.
Wow. No, it's true. Well, Dr. Simon, it is always a pleasure.
Well, thank you for having me.